righty, my friends. Here we are again. This is an episode long in the waiting. Someone I have admired and been so thankful to have collaborated with and to have learned from over the years. Jenia Auman, welcome to the Tyler Hill podcast.
I'm so glad to be here. It does feel like this should have happened 10 years ago. You know what I mean?
I,
Even though
I,
we haven't known each other that long, but it should have happened sooner. And I'm
yes,
glad it's happening now.
me too. I was like when I was thinking about what I wanted to say in the intro, which I'll record in a little bit, and even here, I think one of the things that's just been so crazy, or I guess more that I'm thankful for, Janai, is like you've been a champion of me already so much, and like have been so supportive of me, um, and just connecting me with people, encouraging me in my book writing and like I'm just so thankful for your presence in my life, even if it's been entirely virtual already. I felt so encouraged and seen and supported by you. And to just have people in my corner like you has meant the world. And so just as we get this going, I just wanted to express my gratitude in front of all the listeners as well. And that I'm just coming here in great gratitude and humility for your support, even if it's just shares or connecting me with people or encouraging me in the book writing process. So thank you, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. I feel like one of my well, number one, I like what you do. I'll just say that. I just like what you do. And I can't say that for everyone in the world, even in Christian or quasi-Christian or even quasi-spiritual spaces. But I do appreciate just how you present to the world and how you put breathe life into the world. I think that I don't know you, but I'm like, oh, I like the energy that you put into your work and how you do your work. And so that's one thing. And also, I one of my ethics is just like a guiding ethic in life for me is that I work from abundance. I am not competitive. I am so not competitive, which is probably, I'm from Texas, born and raised, and that's probably the least Texan thing about me is like I just don't buy into competition. Could care less about sports even, but I really love if anyone does like the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 2, and
Mm,
so I am all about how can I support and cheerlead you in the ways that you need to be supported and yeah, so
yeah,
thank you for just making space for me and then also letting me reciprocate and make space for you. I think
yeah.
that's how the world should go round.
So good. Um, Before we talk about all the good stuff, all the wisdom,
Yeah.
the stories, all of that, um, we obviously are more than what we do, more than what we teach. Let's say, Janai, for just say you have a weekend to yourself, got a couple extra $100 to spend. What is Janai Alman doing with a little bit of time to herself? What brings her just life? We're not working. We're not accomplishing anything. We are not striving. We are just having fun, sparking joy. What are you doing with a little bit of time and a little bit of extra money in your weekend or over a little bit of space?
Oh gosh, I depending on the weekend, the first thing that came to mind is going to the movies by myself. I love going to the movies by myself. And we have some pretty, I don't know what ha has happened with like movie theater technology, but we have this tremendous theater with like lounger seats, the reclining seats where you're almost full on laying down. And then the one closest to me, my favorite one closest to me, has heated seats
Mhm.
and they do like the food to your
Oh yeah.
seat and I don't know, that's it's like the height of luxury for me. I was always like a movie watching kid. Also, one of my favorite, and I've talked about this in other places, one way that I maybe cope with the world or just take care of myself is by and through laughter. And so if I had disposable income and a favorite comedian of mine was coming into town, I would 100% try to get a front row seat to that comedy show. So there's been a few that have come through town that I've missed that I'm like, oh man, I missed it. But that's like those are the two things that I thought of that came to the top of my mind, like first and
Who are
foremost.
some of your comedians? Who are some of your people?
Oh, Okatska is like a I would say she's established, but like rising and so funny. Pete Holmes recently came to Houston and I totally missed Pete and I would have 100 I know I would have totally 100% gone even if I was in like the nosebleeds.
Yep.
Um Mike Birbiglia, John Mulaney I think is coming through soon. Taylor Tomlinson, Ali Wong. I watch a lot of stand-up like I think some people have their comfort shows where they just kind of keep it on repeat. And I have a few comfort shows as well. But if I'm like folding the laundry and I need to watch something on my own, it's usually stand-up comedy and um I love it. I mean, some of the comedy I like shudder to like say the names of the comedians because they get pretty crass and I feel like I can take some of like I grew up in a pretty crass household. But I do love stand-up comedy a lot because there's something about laughter, but also they notice things in the world that like some of us take advantage of, and they're bold enough to like turn it into a bit. And just I love the writing process of comedy as well.
I recently excuse me. I recently was interviewing one of my friends who I knew from my hospitality days. We both had started coffee companies and were hospitality consultants. And he was talking about the guest experience, and we were talking about the ins and outs of hospitality. And he goes, good hospitality is like writing a really good joke. And he was talking about how he was like, when you're watching stand-up comedy and then they start telling a story and you're like following along and then they take just a big right turn and you're like, holy shit, that is not what I expected and it's so funny. And but there's an art to that. You bring them in and then you surprise them. Well, a good hospitality experience, a great expression of hospitality is very similar. You feel welcome, you feel seen, and then, wow, they remembered my birthday. Wow, they brought me something that I really needed. And kind of the formula of a really good guest experience is actually the same as like writing jokes, which I've really been thinking about that. And it's like it really is a highlight of humanity. There's like a formula almost to it of highlighting the things that are actually happening, the things people need or whatever. And also, I very much relate with that. Some days after a long day of spiritual direction, and my wife knows I had 10 clients or something over the last day or two, she'll say, like, how many Seinfelds do you need tonight before you can, like, before I, like, come back upstairs to be with the family or whatever? It's like, okay, yeah, this is a two Seinfeld detox before I come back to the world. But I do love stand-up comedy too, for sure. But
Yeah, I think th there's something in stand-up comedy to your point. Like there's the callback, like
mhm.
something that the comedian was talking about like an hour before. I
Yes.
was watching one of not I'm sorry, not Pete Holmes. It was Mike Birbiglia's, and I'm not going to ruin it for anyone if anyone wants to go. But in one of his stand-up specials, he starts talking about this old man. Um, and I looked at my husband and I said, if he's going to do what I think he's going to do, he's going to be the old man in the end. And sure enough, that's what he did. And I was like, that's just a callback. That's what you do. But I think you're right in that in hospitality, the callback is showing folks that you've remembered
Yes.
information about them and like calling back to that information that they shared with you. That's really cool. That's a really
Yeah.
good, astute observation.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Pete Holmes' HBO show, like his sitcom show?
No, I started it and then I realized this is one of those things that I need to binge, and so I need time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was so healing for me. And like just in that like even in the music, like playing like just old awful Christian rock music in the car in the show and I was like I felt so seen by that show in just his journey into mine and it honestly was one of the more healing things for me as I've gone just through my spiritual journey to like be so recognized in the subculture by somebody else in that way. And he created a big piece of art that aligned with it. Anyways, it was very, very helpful for me. Um, so you mentioned growing up in Texas. I'd be curious,
Hmm.
where would you consider that home? Like, is Texas the place that formed you, that made you into the person you are? Where would you consider home to be?
Oh gosh. I would say if you're asking me where I'm from,
Mhm.
I would probably say from Houston. I feel more at home in Houston. I wasn't born and raised in Houston. I was actually born and raised in a very small area outside of Houston. Actually, the area I was from is closer to Louisiana than it is to Houston. It's southeast Texas, like right on the coast. So, like where hurricanes tend to hit is where I'm from, but it's a small area called Nederland, Texas, outside of Beaumont and Port Arthur, which are usually in the news for bad reasons. But I felt like in small town Texas, and maybe for folks that were biracial or multi-ethnic growing up in small town Texas areas, it felt like a place I was in, but in order to grow, I needed to get out of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of that growth has happened in Houston. Certainly, I was formed and shaped in my hometown area, but I feel like being in Houston has done a lot of the work of like formation, positive and I guess negative formation within me. But as far as home, I feel we've thought about moving us as a family to other places before, and there is something in me that knows like place is very important. If I'm going to be in a place, I'm going to be in a place. I'm not going to constantly dream of being elsewhere. But if home is within me, I can find a home in any other place, so long as I feel at home with myself. And that the people in my family feel at home with themselves. And so even in traveling, I would say I've not felt this way about certain places, but there have been places my husband and I have traveled to the Pacific Northwest, and there was a part of me that thought, I feel at home here and I don't know why. I've never, experienced this area, but there's like a piece like of kinship that I feel with this place. I have family in LA and I've been to New York. I didn't necessarily that have that sense of home there. You know what I mean? There's like this
Yep.
intuition of like this could be somewhere. There's something to this particular land. I would say the strongest sense of home, and it was just a trip. It was Scotland. There was something like ethereal, deep and like divine, where I thought, and I do have ancestor. My dad's side of the family is from Scotland, and so I was like, there is something here that
Yep.
compels me. I found a piece of home here, and I don't know what that means. And with my mom's side being Filipino, I suspect that if and when I go to the Philippines, I've never been yet, I'm going to sense that there as well. But yeah, I would say yes, Texas has formed me in a lot of ways, and also I don't consider myself like the consummate Texan,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
for sure. Could you speak into just a little bit? You mentioned cultivating this sense of feeling at home in yourself, and if your family feels at home in themselves, what does that mean? How do you do that?
Mm.
And selfishly, I would love to know, how do you do that with your kids, especially, and create an environment where they can also feel at home in themselves?
Yeah, well, for me, I would say it's about how do I need to cultivate a sense of security within me such that the world around me can be in chaos. And sure enough, the world around me is in chaos. And I know that I still carry a piece of God's shalom with me. That there is
Mm,
some of the ascetics would say apatheia, like an imperturbable calm, or
mm,
the peace that surpasses all understanding. I think that scripture, that verse meant something to me, but whenever I came more and more came home to myself, which required me to stop assimilating and conforming to certain cultural standards. Once I did that, when I stopped doing what other people expected of me and started asking myself, what do I want for myself? I started to come home to myself and experience like this. I grew up in spaces and places where what you think doesn't matter, what you want to do doesn't matter. It's whether or not you actually, like, if you want belonging, you have to cut away pieces of yourself.
Mhm.
And I started to come home to myself when I stopped doing that and started actually dreaming, kind of actually reclaiming this sense of childlike wonder about, well, what does God want for my life? What does God want me to dream about for my own life? And kind of being curious and about myself. And for so long, that felt unsafe. And so for parenthood, it's about cultivating. And I'm not going to say if my kids came and like were speaking to you right now, I think they'd be like, yeah, I feel at home with myself. But I also know that it's a like they're teenagers on the cusp, like very early teenage years. And so they've got a lot of that. My heart goes out to them because like I just hurt knowing like how much like internal growth that they're going to have to do. But as a parent, it's just kind of about creating the space of like, do they get to ask those wondering curiosity questions? Because I don't want them to I don't want to poke and prod them so much that they feel like they have to give me an answer either. I just want them to feel the freedom to
Mhm.
say, I think this is where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Which you talk about that childlikeness, I think about just like my son when he was even younger, and I'm already seeing that fade to some degree, him being 6, but like when he was 3, he would in 1 minute be wearing an Elsa dress, and in another moment being Chase the dog and being a Jedi, and it's just like that oscillation, that curiosity and the exploration. I am this, I am that, I am this is something we've all had to reclaim at some point. Um, on that journey, Janai, do you remember some of those first things that were coming true as you came home to yourself? Like that first thing that you maybe had said where you're like, oh, this is what I need. This is who I am. When you started not cutting off those pieces of yourself and started coming home, what was one of those first awakenings for you as you came home to you?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned before, and forgive me if not everyone is like savvy in Enneagram language, but I mentioned being an Enneagram 2, who is typically, I think some folks label them the helper.
Hmm.
So they will help you do or achieve whatever you need to do or achieve, but sometimes the helper doesn't know how they need help, or they have a hard time asking for help. And usually they have a hard time asking for help because they don't know what they need, or they don't even know what they want. And so I would have said this before, having been in like ministry spaces, I had a pretty good radar for the needs of people around me. Not a perfect radar, but I could kind of see like in a small group situation who's feeling uncomfortable, who is perhaps taking up too much space such that they're making other people feel uncomfortable. Like my social radar was pretty good, but I would have said my internal radar was crap. You know what I mean? Like total garbage. And I didn't ask for help, but I obviously needed help in many ways. And so I think the first time I felt that sense of childlike wonder was actually, and for folks familiar with my work, they know I went through a spiritually abusive environment where I was on church staff, and essentially the position I was in was the one that had conditioned me to constantly help other people, but conditioned me also to not ask. It wasn't safe for me to ask for help.
Hmm.
And so I left that position. I was forced to leave that position. And so I was kind of in this very scary, and I've kind of said that it was a wilderness moment where I had to figure out like what do I need? What provisions do I need? And I had all these questions, and it was never safe to ask these questions or even find the answers to these questions. And I remember one of the questions was like, well, what do I do for a job now when and you might resonate with this, when your resume is so loaded for ministry work and you've just been forced out of a position and you carry the shame and you're like, well, how do I even be a working human again? Not only a working human, but I also am a woman. And so I know that women are paid less on the dollar than men. And I like coming over these things and I thought, well, I could do what other people expected me to, which is like find a similar role where I could just continue to be exploited and used, or I could actually think about what I wanted to do.
mm,
And that was right.
mm,
And
mm,
that was so scary because I was like, writers don't make a ton of money.
mm,
I don't know anyone in this industry. I had
mm,
zero writing friends. And so to your point earlier about like being a champion and like cheerleading others, I think it's because I know how lonely and how weird this work is. And it's weird. It's the bravery it takes to get into being even just calling yourself a writer. It felt like, is anyone gatekeeping this? Do I need to ask anyone's
mm.
permission?
Yeah.
But letting myself become a writer was like
Mm,
this. It was like the 10-year-old in me waking up, a 10-year-old that had to survive
mm,
many aspects of my childhood, finally having the space to say, this is what I want to be when I grow up.
uh-huh.
And I was, 30, 32, 33 whenever this was happening. So yeah, it was fine. It was almost like, the 10-year-old in me finally had permission to say what she wanted, and that was kind of a really sacred thing.
Mm. Do you have like does 10-year-old Janai like was she a writer then or was she a book person? Like do you recall some of those like memories or those illuminations when you were younger?
Yes. So there's something weird about like everyone. I have a lot of writer friends now who are like, I've wanted to write since the third grade, or I've wanted to always be a writer. I wasn't that way. I was a book reader.
Mhm.
So you'll see books here. What you don't see is I have books there. I have books there. I have probably 400 or 500 books right here. And then I have several, maybe 1,000, 2,000 books downstairs in a library it was a formal dining room. I am not a formal dining room person that we converted into a library. So I've always been a book reader. Many of the books on this shelf are books from my childhood. So some of my
Mm,
favorite books.
mhm,
I didn't play sports. Again, I wasn't competitive kid, and I was also left to my own devices as a kid. So, there was two things I got really good at when I was really young. I got really good at shooting hoops and playing basketball by myself. Gary Goldman, a comedian, actually has a really great stand-up bit about like the lonely kid, like playing basketball is like the supreme lonely kid game. Um, so I started playing basketball by myself and shooting hoops, and I got really good at that. And I was an incredible reader. So if anyone's familiar with like the AR program that a lot of millennial kids went through in like elementary school and middle school, I was like crushing that. My star was so far down the wall. I got to go to the parties and the field trips that were awarded. So I've always been a reader. And there's something I think it was Teresa of Avila who said that like books were her friends.
yeah.
And when I read that in her some of the work as I like recently researched her, I thought, oh, like there's other people who have felt that way too. So in many ways, when I was alone as a kid and left to my own devices, books felt a lot like and stories felt like a lot like friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I just really so appreciate that. And I think, in so much of the work I do, when we can go back to our 10-year-old self, our 9-year-old self, like they tell us the truth. And if we can just find the freedom to listen to them, the freedom and the permission we get to be ourselves is so liberating. And it's not, so often we try to go outside of ourselves to figure out who we're supposed to be when we can just ask our younger self and they tell us the truth. I always joke about, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but in the work that I'm getting to do now, I host people and we talk about things and I get to make videos and I get to write and things. And I can remember I had this memory where I used to buy Rob Bell's DVDs and I would hide them because we weren't allowed to have Rob Bell in the house.
Yeah.
but I was so compelled and I bought glasses like him, even though I didn't tell my parents, or whatever. And now it's like, I'm trying to be me, but I was illuminated by just this creative spiritual expression. And um, again, my 10-year-old self hiding these DVDs under my bed has told me the truth now. How, Janai, as you started to go on that journey, would you be willing to sort of let us into some of that story of how that self exploration happened? For many of us, as is the case in your story, um, it's by a little bit of suffering, usually cracks open the door. And some really hard parts of our stories that really begin to lead us to ask these questions and start the journey of exploring our younger selves and finding what we need. Would you be willing to let us into just a little bit of that story, going from your maybe earlier spiritualities into your newfound expressions? And what was that story like for you? And how did you get going on this new path that you're on?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll share when I was a kid, and from this is so different from even my husband and many of the folks that are a part of my readership. I wasn't raised within the Christian church despite being raised in the South, which I feel like
Interesting.
Christ yeah, like Christianity was certainly in the water
Yep.
of Southeast Texas and even in our school district, like the people that govern our school district, and even now, to my dismay, govern what is taught to our children in public school. And so I was a public school kid, and so it was certainly within the culture, like it was the waters in which I swam. And so, kind of by, I guess, osmosis, some of that Christianity. And I probably would have said, yeah, culturally, I'm Christian. I'm not Jewish. I'm not whatever.
Yep.
Um, but I also, my house was strange. My dad was, he vacillated. Maybe he was both at the same time, agnostic and atheist. He had a like, opened like vitriol toward God. He was mad at God. And a lot of that is born from his own like life of suffering. He was born with a cleft palate. And so a lot of like in the 50s, which is like, the technology now is so different from when my dad was a kid. And so it kind of comes from his own wounding in life, why he never really accepted God as this authority in his life. And I don't blame him because a lot of the people who were Christians in his life were probably also harmful. And then my mother, she came over to the United States from the Philippines, and the Philippines is a very culturally Catholic
Hmm.
society, and uh, so much so that outside of the Vatican, the only place where it's illegal to get a divorce in the world is the Philippines, and many people don't know that, and so that is, I don't say that to champion them. I actually think it causes a lot of strife for people who are trying to escape harmful marriages in the Philippines. But that's kind of like the religious makeup of my home growing up, is this culturally Catholic. So I was baptized Catholic, and my dad was there when I was baptized Catholic, even though he wasn't Catholic. And then also God played largely no role in my life. Um, but one thing that kind of marked my childhood was just a lot of pain, pain in my parents' relationships, pain within their own lives, the pain of my dad having like just all the things that I have empathy for him now. I did not have empathy for him when I was a teenager.
Mhm.
And he's long since passed, but I do have a lot of empathy for my dad and what he had to walk through. And then also pain for my mother, who came to the States kind of believing like this American frontier would actually help her family in the Philippines. The Philippines at the time was under a dictatorship, and so she was sending money back to her folks at home and her family at home, and so there's just my childhood was marked with pain. And I came to the Christian faith when I was a teen for hope.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
Mhm.
I came for hope. And so the way that I came to kind of retransform my life in my 30s was through a moment of pain, but the pain was because of my faith and because of my faith environment. And so this faith environment that brought me so much, it gave me it was a worldview that I kind of latched onto because it made sense of my childhood. and it gave me hope that like my suffering still mattered and it could blossom and bloom into something new, except what I was experiencing is that I was a blooming flower in this faith environment that was like just ravaged with a forest fire, and I didn't know how. And so it tremendous, and then this is being maybe perhaps dramatic, but I felt like burned down to the ashes when we left our faith home. And so there's a great quote by Father Richard Rohr, that if we don't transform our pain, we're most certainly to transmit it. And I think I did experience that in my dad's life, at how he didn't tend to the pain within him, and so he hurt those around him.
Mhm.
And I realized also my undergrad is in behavioral health, and so I had some language for this, and I thought I need to actually tend to whatever is insecure within me, and actually not only for me to bloom, but also so that my kids don't
Mhm.
grow up to be healthy adults in spite of me. You know, I want them to feel fostered. And so it really did take that burning down. My worldview had to be totally dismantled. I think I was so scared. I don't think I was going to volunteer
Mhm.
to dismantle it. And I have so much admiration for people who do volunteer. Like I think that's really brave. It takes a lot of balls. I think it's awesome. I don't think I would have left that harmful environment
Mhm.
because as a kid I was conditioned to
Mhm.
accept harmful environments as normal. And so God or the divine or just the mystery of the world around me, like maybe perhaps intervened on my behalf
Mhm.
to say like this needs to fall apart. So that that also takes a special bravery. I did not want it, but I always tell people it was wisdom that I didn't want, but I do have wisdom from it now. And I think, Tyler, you're gonna have to forgive me. I totally forgot what your original question was.
That's okay. This is great. This is
Okay,
exactly good.
but it is something about like kids create something from nothing often. How they like are in a sandbox and they construct worlds within a sandbox. And I realized I was so scared of constructing something, but it took
Mhm.
everything burning down for me to realize these ashes are just a new sandbox where I have to reimagine what life is like. And I had to reconstruct a worldview where I could find hope again because my source of hope in the environment where I found a source of hope had just fallen apart.
Yes.
And so not only did I reconstruct and reimagine hope, but I wanted it to be expansive such that
Mhm.
it wouldn't be limited by a particular worldview. It would actually allow space for change
Mhm.
and growth, and such that I wouldn't have to cut away pieces of myself to belong anywhere anymore.
Yeah.
Does
That
that
that is
kind
so
of
good.
flow?
Yes, of
Okay.
course. Um, and so for you, it seems like, and I really appreciate that the dichotomy that for some of us, we kind of choose to start to deconstruct the boat we grew up in, and for others, it just happens. There is just a forest fire. And if I heard you correctly, for you, there was some things that were much out of your control that sort of forced you into this season of having to leave the first boat, as Father Richard would say.
Mm,
That sounds very traumatic. And I don't mean to, we don't need to just, relive that too much, but not only it seems to me that not only did you have to build out of this gorgeous sandbox of opportunity, but there had to have been some healing that had to have happened before. That there had to have been some healing from this spirituality, this container that you at one point had found a lot of hope in. You came to this spirituality to find hope and did, and then it's gone. What did that
mm,
feel like? What kind of healing had to take place in order for you to take these ashes and build something beautiful? And we'll talk mostly about building something beautiful, but I just to relate with the folks who might be in the ashes, not ready to build yet, that are just like
mm,
this sucks, or maybe the embers are still hot. Could you let us into your story of healing and to some degree, what did you even have to heal from in order to become and start expanding the ways in which you have and allowed your expansion to bless the world as it does?
Yeah. Well, I'll quick on background. I came out of the X29 network. I know some
Oh,
people,
mhm.
like perhaps, I don't know, fortunately, they don't know anything about the X29 network. And then for others, they're aware that there are stories about the founder in the news who has just a pattern, a consistent pattern of harmful behavior throughout the network. That's not to say that all the people in the network are harmful and abusive. It's just there's a pattern of this sort of behavior happening within the network.
Mm,
I will also say that the network is, and when I elected and volunteered to help plant this church, I didn't know we were going to be a part of the Acts 29 network. We came out of an egalitarian context where women were pastors,
mm,
and then we assumed this Acts 29 affiliation. And I all of a sudden learned that women could, like, we're so much more limited in the role. I was
mm,
22 when this was all happening. So I was also only a believer for 5 years at that point.
wow.
And so I am kind of, I'm all in. Again, I want to be as helpful as possible. And then I didn't know at the time that I was volunteering to be a champion for my own subjugation.
Mm,
And so that's the context that I came out of. Um, the healing after leaving that, I realized, and I will say, and for some other people, this is not the case. I never doubted my relationship to God, and I never doubted that I was beloved by God.
mhm,
Um, Despite the predominant theology of the network, the worm theology, I never doubted that like somehow I mattered. Um, because I didn't have that Christian upbringing that was like, you have to be obedient, otherwise you're going to hell, or you have to be this. My childhood was one of survival, and God became a source of hope. He wanted me. And
mm,
so that idea, that relationship I had with God when I came to faith in my teen years is still with me, that God wants me. Why does God's people not want me? Was what I was reckoning with. And so it was really about reorienting my relationship with the church itself and less so a divide. Whenever I walked out into the wilderness, and I've mentioned this maybe in my book and other places, I believe God walked out with me
mhm,
to find me. And that's what the story that we see consistently throughout scripture is that God provides in the wilderness consistently. And so it was really about healing why people didn't want me. And why would they say they wanted me? Come as you are, but clean up when you get here. Like, why become more like us? And it was just me reckoning with that. And the one healing, I would say this is a turning point in my healing. I was telling a friend about how mad I was at these people who had hurt me, and they were also her former friends. And she said to me, she said, God can handle your anger when other people cannot. And I thought, oh my gosh,
mm,
that that's true.
mhm,
If God is truly God, God can handle, like, God is not so insecure that someone coming back to him with feedback or just anger or grief or whatever,
mhm,
he like as if God would feel put out.
mhm,
And so that was a pivotal moment for me, was understanding that God still wanted me, even if the people who represented God behaved otherwise. And once I felt that sense of, oneness with God, that I was forced and silenced into solitude. But as you know, like in contemplative spaces and mysticism, silence and solitude are like the bread and butter, where like oneness with God actually comes to fruition. And I would say that is true of me, that there was like in the solitude and silence, I could actually see, almost like see myself, see like God was holding a mirror before me saying, this is what you look like to me. and I could actually see the belovedness. Not just say, I think a lot of people say belovedness almost as like a you're beloved,
Mhm.
almost kind of like in Texas, we say, bless your heart, like just kind of something to say. But I truly, like, when I say I truly felt I was beloved, I felt that in my bones, in the core of my being. And once you have that, like, people can't take that away. And so that's why I love like contemplative aspects of Christianity so much. But there was a space for me to grieve, and God didn't tell me to stop crying. There was a space for me to rage, and God didn't tell me to calm down. There was a space for me to cuss, and not have to play the games of the politics of respectability, which I know it governs a lot of our social spaces. It governs Texas society a lot, and especially as a woman. And I thought, I am not playing by those rules anymore. And so that's when healing started happening, was that when I saw the mirror God was using to reflect me back to me. And I thought, oh, I do like her. I like myself. And I think for so much of my life, even like in it truly going into my 30s, I didn't like myself. And then I found myself in a reformed space, reformed, an uber reformed theology space where you were told that you were unlikable. And liking myself has meant the world. And
Yes.
loving my neighbor as myself, like, almost like that landed at that point. Like, oh, I never truly loved my neighbor well because I didn't really love myself very well.
Yeah. It's way you described it sounds a lot like I think it's Psalm 139. David goes through this whole like search me and know me. Let's go through all my stuff, the dark, the light, wherever I am, God, you are there. And then in verse like 14, he goes, God, I praise you for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And I love that because he's like, God, I just spent 13 verses looking at myself, all the shit, all the good stuff. And you know what? I can't help but praise you because I really like me. I am like he's talking about himself. I am so wonderful. I can't help but praise you. And just that idea of like, oh, like that's what belovedness is, and I really appreciate that. I actually right before this was writing an essay for Substack about that of like, man, that the word belovedness can be a bless your heart, and I'm totally gonna take that because it can feel that, but for you to say it was embodied, there was an
Mm,
embodied nature to it. In fact, some tears almost snuck out there. There's an embodied nature to belovedness that transcends our intellect.
yeah.
Belovedness is not something we know, but it's something we have to embody. And maybe the first place of embodying it, like David or like you said, was I began to like myself.
Mm.
To love our neighbor as ourselves requires we like ourselves. Janai, would you be willing to share with us some of the things you've grown to love about you? Could you brag on
Oh,
you for just a little bit?
yeah, I love my sense of humor. Listen, I think I'm hilarious, and not in a dad joke way, but like there is this, and I mean, like I said, I watch a lot of stand-up comedy, and I watch Conan and his podcast on YouTube as well, and Conan has said something about like he knows he's funny, but it's when he can get certain people to crack, he's like, I just delight in that. And I love doing that with my husband. Like when there is something that I can just make him crack. There is one, I'm not going to say what show we were watching. Actually, I'll say we were watching Game of Thrones. Something very serious was happening. And I just saw a mental connection between another show that we had watched, and I made like a Fifth Element joke about watching this serious Game of Thrones moment. And my husband like couldn't breathe. He was laughing so hard, and I was like, I did it. No one else in the world saw, but I did it. And I still right now like making him laugh tickles me. So I love my sense of humor. I love, oh gosh, I love that I I love my slowness.
Hmm.
I love how long it takes me to process things. I would have said before that I maybe perhaps as a kid or even a young adult, I felt bad about not being able to keep up sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, and especially coming from a mixed race household or just a multi-ethnic household where my norms weren't everyone else's norms, it felt like there were like inside strategies to being a human being that other people understood that weren't what I understood. For instance, I was just recently reading like Reddit stories. This is also something I do. And I realized you're not supposed to wear red to a wedding in the United States because there's like some weird connotation that you've had a relationship with the groom. Have you ever heard that?
Never heard that.
Okay. Well, maybe this isn't a thing. And in Filipino or just Asian cultures, red is a symbol of joy, so they
Mhm.
wear red to weddings. So like my norms are different, and so I have found that I don't pick up social cues in the same way because my framework for understanding how to move in the world is different. And now I like that slowness about myself.
Mhm.
I like a slower pace. And I like that I am no longer swept away when people start going fast. I am just so boundaried where I'm like, nope, I'm not going with you then. You can go without me. I love that I don't have FOMO. Like, go without me, leave without me. I will miss out. I really like being my own company if I need to be. Um, there's several things I like about I think they're rather ordinary things. I I just like that um I enjoy my life and I take joy in my life. And I think that as a kid, I didn't expect to
Mhm.
I expected it to be a dog eat dog world. And I like that I've not done that to myself and that I've surrounded myself with people who haven't made me live that sort of life either.
Yeah. Hmm. Say there's a person out there that's in their 30s, in their 40s, that doesn't like themselves, that
Mm.
has been told that they are worms, that has been othered, that has been told they have to cut off their arm in order to belong. How have you learned, or how would you coach someone to begin to learn to love themselves or to embody belovedness?
Yeah, I think the first question that comes to mind, and this is what I do a lot in like kind of my group direction, spiritual direction work, is asking them, well, who do you dream about becoming?
Mhm.
What delights you? Um, so often we're taught about, there was a book that I read, oh, I can't remember. It's like Time Management for Mortals is like the subtitle. And the author in that book says, we have such a weird relationship to time that we look at childhood and children as like we have to train them to be adults.
Mhm.
Whereas we should just value them in their childhood now because it's fleeting.
Mhm.
And I think something similar is true of me is that me and like everyone, like we kind of smash the dreams out of kids and we lose that. And I think there's a quote by C.S. Lewis where he says, one day you'll be old enough for fairy tales again, that somehow we've lost the imagination of fairy tales. And so, really, I think there is something to asking a person in their 30s or 40s or 50s, who do you dream about becoming? What do you delight in? Uh,
Mhm.
and kind of not to like the sense of hedonistic, but asking, like, what have you deprived yourself of? What sources of joy have you deprived yourself of? And how can you inject those instances of joy into your dreams?
Mhm. Yes. Wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. The what have you deprived yourself of?
Mm.
That one hits me like I'm like at a loss for words. Like I kind of want to stop the podcast and just go on a walk now. That's a really powerful question. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so you said I guess I'd like to ask you one more question just to follow up, knowing the spaces that we both came from there. You know, so many of us are told though, okay, Janai, like my heart is deceitful. I am bad. My flesh is not good. Why? I can't ask myself, what do I want or what do I need? That will lead me astray. Or for example, and there's a funny saying that happens among addicts. Like I work a lot with folks who are in addiction, and I get the joke here, but I'd be curious how you'd respond when they say, "My best thinking got me here." They'll say in like a recovery space, which me and for that they mean I need help. But what would you say to someone who says, "Okay, that's not good advice, Janai. Like I can't listen to my soul. It's bad. My best thinking isn't sacred or holy." How would you help somebody walk through that, and how have you learned to trust and listen to your inner voice, the divine feminine that has guided you so well to love yourself so affectionately as you just described?
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned before, I've got background in my undergrads in behavioral health, and I'm also have done a lot of trauma-informed training and CEUs, and I work with a nonprofit that is also a clinical mental health nonprofit run by, and so I have a lot of like trauma colleagues. And one thing I know of is, if you're thinking my best thinking got me here,
Mhm.
I would say that there's a difference between survival thinking
Mhm.
and thriving thinking. And so when you're not safe, when you are in survival mode, when you're quote unquote triggered, or another word that I prefer to use is activated,
Mhm.
such that you're like kind of when you enter that Jason Bourne mode, that's what I call myself whenever I get activated. I'm like, I am Jason Bourne right now. I can tell you what cars are outside. You know what I mean? Like I can tell
Yep.
you where the exit is. Um, I am not in a thinking space that is actually oriented to my thriving. I'm looking to for a way out. I'm looking how to run fast. Where's my best course of action such that I can survive this moment. And sometimes those that type of thinking actually can hurt others because my it's either my survival or yours. So if we're in survival mode, I'm picking me. This is how I get me and mine out. And it's kind of a hierarchy. It's a zero-sum game. What I have or what you have, I don't get to have. What I have, you don't get to have. And I would say survival thinking, and I don't pathologize addiction respectfully for other people who may pathologize. I do believe addiction is kind of a way to cope with the world. I think it is a way that it's a it is a grip that people have. It's something that grips you into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you're looking for resources. And
Mhm.
sometimes some of us reach for the wrong resources. And so the difference is getting them like, what do you need to feel safe right now? Such that like you're not going to think of things that I would say delight is different whenever you find the goodness of like a beautiful sunset versus the quote unquote delight of numbing your emotions to the world. You know what I mean? There's a difference there. Having to numb yourself, it means you need to be apart from the world, whereas there's a delight for being in the world,
Mhm.
and you can't experience the latter unless you're feeling safe.
Yeah.
And so my first question would be like, what do you need to do to cultivate a sense of safety around you
Mhm.
such that you can actually ask those curious questions? You are not curious. You don't have the space to be curious when you're in survival thinking. You are just trying to survive and you're trying to live. You're trying to tolerate your environment. And so it is really about like how can we cultivate that sense of safety around you so that you can begin to wonder. It's almost like wandering around. You can't when you're survival like you're in survival mode, you don't wander around. You are strategically picking what locations to nest in for a season and so that you can run to the next point. But when you're, not all who wander are lost. Like that sense of wandering or meandering.
Yeah.
In the South, we call it dilly-dallying. You can't really dilly-dally in survival brain. So I would say, what do we need to do to cultivate a safe container
Yeah.
for you
Hmm.
with whatever resources are around you?
Mhm. So with that being said, then I'd be curious for you to share with us what are some of like there's obviously the big story of you leaving,
Mm.
where you were because that place wasn't safe, but also, as a spiritual director and as a great helper, what are some of the spiritual practices? So maybe you could talk about leaving unsafe places, but also what are some of the spiritual practices you deploy that have allowed you to be safe and to
Mm.
have a nervous system and a spiritual system that is one of safety so that you can be curious and learn to love yourself. Practically, how has that looked for you?
Oh, yeah. I would say one thing is, and this is maybe a keyword just in the zeitgeist at the moment, boundaries. But when I say boundaries, and I mean asking specific questions, I have like a kind of a rule of life for myself. And one way that I make sure I stay in alignment with my rule of life is asking, my whole goal in life is to be a person of shalom, to
Mhm,
have shalom within myself, and that in all the work I do, I extend shalom to others. But one boundary I need is who are the people surrounding me that foster that sense of shalom within me?
mhm,
And are there people around me who actually don't want me in shalom?
mhm,
And how do I create distance between, like, not necessarily no contact, but how do I actually appropriately position them in my life such that they get less influence
mhm,
over me? I actually think that kind of writing down my boundaries is a spiritual practice that I
mhm,
need.
mhm,
Um, Another spiritual practice that I need is I do need alone time. I do need solitude and silence. I don't think that that is necessarily going out into a field in somewhere and doing yoga. For me, it's more so like putting my running shoes on and going running. So it
mhm,
actually looks aggressive, but it's actually really good for me to. There's something about running that forces me to recognize my breathing in a way that I have to. And I'm typically a very shallow breather. And so I guess the practical is, do whatever gets you cognitive of your breath,
mhm,
um, and to actually pay attention to what is filling you with life and how you're breathing life back out. Um, I think another thing is just learning, naming ways that you feel shame in your life and thinking about like, how do I kind of release these instances of shame to God and say like I don't how do I not live in this sort of empire? I think the empire is what creates like shame for not living up to the empire standards, whatever the empire is, whether that's your job or your government or whatever. And so for those again who are familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a part of the shame triad, and so I tend to almost previously I would wear shame like it was like a cloak. I think in many instances I carried shame because I confused it with humility. Um, like this is just what it means to be humble. You just got to be ashamed of yourself. And I realized no. So now I actually have a regular shame practice of like, what am I feeling ashamed for? And and kind of thinking through these things. And so I just have I reimagined. So that was one big thing in my kind of reconstruction, deconstruction, reimagination process is how can I reimagine my spiritual practices such that, like, what do I need to do to foster oneness with God? Where do I sense God's nearness? I will do those. It doesn't look like praying in the ways that I used to pray or like having a prayer journal. Um, it just looks so very different. I think I've begun to expand and see like what am I already doing that can I actually like invite God into so that I can actually see this. So as again, seeing myself through God's mirror.
yeah,
Um,
mm,
just you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just kind of think about, well, what can I tweak a little bit? What's something I already do?
mm,
So yeah.
yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, so much of what you just said. I love how it almost feels radical or alternative to, like you didn't say, I sit down every morning and do this. It's identify shame and I try to let it go. Because shame and oneness with God, that oil and water don't mix. There's no
Mm-mm.
shame where God is. And so if I see it, I got to get rid of it. Like I really appreciate those other ways. Just such deep wisdom there, Janai. Um, okay, here's my spicy question then. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I also
Oh,
want to, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
open. So yeah, no hard
So
stops for me.
so we talk about uh creating space and we creating boundaries. And your book, if I have the title right, is called Othered.
Mm.
And I'm curious, and we can dive a little bit more into the book. Some might say, I have maybe older, more conservative leaning clients that hate this boundaries era. I have many parents whose kids are trying to set boundaries, and the parents are just like, this is from the depths of hell, these boundaries. Um, and so we've got to work through that. But I heard you say there's some people I got to push away. I got to create some space from these people to maintain my inner shalom. I know I said this is not gotcha journalism, but that sounds like othering, Janai. Help me understand.
No. Yeah.
Like help me understand, how do we create these spaces of welcome? I want to be somebody of hospitality. Girl, you best believe I got boundaries in my life. But how do we be hospitable, welcoming, loving, Christ-like people while still maintaining these boundaries? And what does it mean in that regard? And then we can dive into the book after that. But I'm curious, how have you reconciled that in your life?
Yeah. The people that I keep distance from are actually usually people who have harmed me in some way and who would not, for whatever reason, promise to n stop harming me. And so one way that I distinguish um, no contact versus othering is I am not like, I want them to, they need friends. They need friends in their lives to speak into their life, to give them wisdom. They deserve to have their own wisdom counsel, whatever that looks like. Some of them don't want that or don't have that. And I don't try to contact, their empl I read crazy Reddit stories sometimes. I don't try to cut them off from the places that they already do belong to. It's just that I can no longer belong to myself if you are in my life because you were trying to coerce
Mhm,
or you don't respect my agency.
mhm,
And so I respect my agency and my sense of being in the world enough that I know that I can't have you be in a space of influence over me. You get to belong, but because your guiding ethic is so different than mine and actually may perhaps harmful to me or other people, I need a no contact boundary with you. And I know that you are free to belong elsewhere.
mhm,
And that came with a lot of trial and error. I've had to do that with a lot of people, a part of my childhood. Um, Even some my kids haven't met some of the people on my side of the family just because I am so strong about you don't get influence.
mhm.
I also have empathy for them, and I know these are the things, this is how much, but I know I see their insecurity.
Yes.
But I am not responsible over it,
Mhm,
and I'm not a person of influence over, their guiding ethic either. But the way of agency is like I respect their agency. I also respect mine. And so othering is ostracizing someone saying we you need to be the lowest of low in almost like this retributive um you need to be underfoot sort of thing. And I don't think going no contact or having a strong boundary with people is necessarily wanting them underfoot. It's just saying you don't get to speak into certain things that you don't have. I am not inviting you in. I am only inviting you so far.
mhm.
Um, and I think it's distinct from othering. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Of course. Yeah, absolutely it does. Would you be willing to just speak into, obviously we're touching it a little bit, but you wrote a book
Hmm.
about this. let us into the book, give us the pitch for it, and just share maybe some of those great bullet points and nuggets from it. It's in my spiritual direction office because I recommend it. I don't have it here, or else I would hold it up. I was looking for it, but
I know.
it's a great book. Yeah, let us into that, and yeah, just tell us a little bit about it.
I'm like, this is very typical of me. I'm usually a terrible author because I'm like, I don't even think I have a copy of the book anywhere. I just actually just found a copy. So it's called Othered,
Yes,
Finding Belonging with the God Who Pursues the Hurt, Harmed,
and
and Marginalized.
and really quick, who made the cover?
I did.
Yeah, you
And I
did.
will say that's when this surprised me. The 10-year-old in me came out again and it
Uh-huh.
was like freaking awesome. I get to do my own cover of the book. I will admit now that doing a cover is really hard and pleasing yourself is really hard. So there was a moment in the process where I was like, somebody else has got to do this. I don't want to do it anymore. But I do like how it ended up. So in the book, I kind of blend not only my church staff experience and my experience of church planting within that particular network, but I also bring in my upbringing. And I tried to weave in this story of belonging in the church is so important. And I think this is how belonging was used against me or weaponized against me to belong in a church, and I mentioned it earlier, there's often this message, come as you are, but then there's this underlying unspoken message of like, clean up when you get here. And sometimes the cleanup when you get here is what people often call the process of sanctification. And I will say that there should be growth. And I would almost say that growth is encouraged, change is encouraged. There's also this evolution of faith that should be encouraged. But we often kind of, because of the value statements with these words in Christianity, sanctification sometimes looks like coercion, manipulation, it's assimilation. And so in the book, I also point to instances in church history where assimilation was equated with sanctification or salvation, or going so far as to say in the Doctrine of Discovery, I think it was like the second papal bull of the Doctrine of Discovery, this is 500 years ago, that said, you know, we have to go and conquer the savages for the salvation of their souls. And how that actually governed, like the Doctrine of Discovery, not only governed international law, but land development law. It governed the societal norms for the church and how they related to native tribes on Turtle Island, which is the United States and Canada and the Americas. But I tried to show that God actually, there's a lot of diversity in the Bible. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens in the every like theophany of God. There's some weird thing that's happening when God appears in the story. Weird is welcome. Your otherness, the things that make you different, the things that make you strange, the things that make you not fit, things that Christian culture would say needs to change within you so that you can assimilate into culture. I would say those are the things that God blesses. Your weirdness is what helps you foster goodness on earth. And it is so often the ways that we're weird or we're different or that we're brave enough to say, hey, this thing that's normal in our churches is actually really harmful. It's that weird sense of us, like that, the black sheep in us, that is actually the prophetic voice that says, hey, differences are not welcome here. And I, I'm calling BS. You know what I mean? And so in Othered, I tried to say that God welcomes your weird. God welcomes your strange. It's not that I think we need to end otherness, which I think is like we need to all be like we need to I'm not encouraging a sense of sameness at all. I actually think sameness is harmful because it's what encourages even encouraging a different type of assimilation. I'm saying that God blesses and loves your weird. If God didn't love our weird, he would have made us carbon copies. But
Yeah.
that's what the empire does, the empire consciousness, or what Brueggemann calls the royal consciousness in his book, The Prophetic Imagination. The empire is like forges a mold. in the fire of the empire and tries to fit everyone to that mold. That's sameness, and that's harmful. And so in Othered, I tried to articulate that the ways in which you've been abused or harmed within spiritual spaces for being other or different, that's actually probably a gift of yours that God has given you for whatever reason. And it's probably a gift through which the Holy Spirit in you is trying to speak to the world around you. And we see throughout scripture, there were a lot of ostracized people in the Bible who were revealing the goodness of God to the culture around them. And for whatever reason, the culture devalued them.
Mm. This is another time where I want to stop the podcast and just go on a walk, just to considering the way in which the weird were the ones who so often proclaimed divine love. And it's so often like the prophets were not the ones who had assimilated. It was
Yeah,
it was the punks, it was the queer people, it was the poor and the marginalized, the immigrants, the ones who didn't assimilate, who so often proclaimed the love of God. And
yeah,
to just look for those. I'm convicted here to just think about the ways in which I've not listened to those people, and where else could I find God's love by seeking out the weird.
yeah.
Ugh.
It's so interesting to your point. I'm in seminary and I was in a class fairly recently about how, and one fellow student, who is a student who is a part of the cultural majority as a white person, said, like, I think we just need to cultivate these communities of reciprocity. And I said, that's already happening. It's happening within marginalized communities. It's just they don't get a voice to say that,
Mhm.
or their voices are devalued such that we ignore them. So, like, look at the margins. Look at where people are flourishing in the cracks of society. They have something to say.
Yes. Yes. Hmm. Mm. So good. Um, a couple last questions. First of
Yeah.
all, where can people engage with you and where can they find your work? Where can they learn from you or engage with you in ways that could be beneficial, of course, to the listeners, but also to you?
Yeah, well, depending on when this comes out, I've actually taken time for myself this summer to just disengage from
That's what I'm
all
talking
things
about.
internet. I know. So I will say I'm most active on Instagram and Threads, and I will be or have been more active on Substack. I have taken time off, so if you go and log on and see so and so, Jenia hasn't posted in X number of weeks or days or months or whatever. That was just for the benefit of my soul and for Sabbath. But Instagram, Threads, Substack are normally where I hang out. I tell people I answer my email. So if people have questions and they want to send me an email, like, I'm not a super popular human being. My email's usually fairly manageable. I'm glad to answer emails as well. But yeah, I love spending time historically on Instagram and looking forward to like my return to that in the future. But if you Google me, Jenia Auman, you'll find me. I should be the only one. If there's another one, I'll be surprised.
Yes.
But yeah, and I'm out there. It's not weird if you send me a DM or approach me in any way.
Great. And I, of course, will link all that below. My last big question for you is when does your comedy special come out?
Probably never. Here's the thing. I think I would be a great comedy writer. I don't think I would deliver it well. So hopefully one day in the future I could like ghost or just write for a comedian and then in my old age finally disclose to everyone I wrote those jokes. But I don't, you know what I don't I am more of a Alfred than a Batman, so I don't want center stage.
That's
But
fair.
I love it when other people deliver jokes. Anyway,
Yes.
that would be awesome though.
For what it's worth, you made me laugh very authentically more than once today. I think you are hilarious. And however it gets made manifest, we need more jokes from Janai. So let's make it happen somehow. Dear God, please.
Maybe maybe I'll follow your lead and just make a podcast. I would just love to have a fun podcast where I don't talk about serious things. I just don't know if anyone would listen.
Listen, honestly, not that many people listen to this podcast. Enough do, but I get to talk with people I admire and I get to make Instagram clips out of it because apparently that's what I'm supposed to do. And the yeses I've gotten to have fun conversations with people I admire is entirely worth the effort of doing a podcast. So,
Yeah.
yes, please, let's laugh. And we just need more of Janai in the world. At your own pace, though. Hell yeah, take breaks. What a good example. We'll talk more about rest later. But Janai, Auman, thank you. I am just so blessed and literally am just overwhelmed with things to contemplate after just being with you. Your presence truly is a gift.
Thank you so much, Tyler. This really was fun.